spring statement is tomorrow, and the Times this morning reports that the government may introduce tolls on the roads. We're joined now by Business Minister Paul Scully. Morning.
Morning.
This may be something that's away a bit in the future, but this idea of tolls, charging people to use certain routes, is that something that you're keen on?
I think it needs to be really worked through. If you, it's not something I'd be keen on now, but if you're looking at electric cars in sort of like 10 years time, then obviously if fuel duty starts to go by the wayside, the Treasury's got to find something to replace that with. But that's I suspect lots of debate before we get anywhere near that.
Well, absolutely. But just to continue on it quickly, it's always been a bit of a vote loser, hasn't it? So, but do you think that times have changed sufficiently this time around for people to be more open minded to it?
I think on certain, you see certain routes like the M6 and other areas and crossings where tolls have been used reasonably successfully, and they're used in other European countries successfully. But I think it's quite a culture change because there are certain people in rural areas. I'm a London MP; it's easy to get around, but in rural areas, people are reliant on their cars, and so I think we've got to tread really carefully before we choke off one option of transportation where the public transport isn't really there for them.
Let's talk a bit about the spring statement. People obviously feeling the pinch right now and worried about what is going to happen: cost of living, energy prices, this national insurance rise. Um, are you comfortable putting up taxes so much? Because I think it's fair to say that there has been quite a bit of debate in cabinet about going ahead with this national insurance rise. How do you personally feel about it?
I don't think you find any Conservative that's really comfortable about putting up taxes as a principle. However, with the national insurance levy, we've got a particular situation where we've got 6 million people on waiting lists because it's backed up through the COVID pandemic. We've still got to tackle the social care issue. So we need that money coming in from somewhere. But the national insurance levy, as proposed, has 40% of the employers not having to pay any more than they do now. The top 50% of that national insurance levy will be raised by the top 15% of earners, and 6 million of the lowest paid won't pay any extra at all. So it's aimed correctly, but clearly the Chancellor is listening, and he's proven he will flex over the last 2 years over the pandemic when he listens to what is happening on the ground, and he'll look at the whole of the public finances in his spring statement tomorrow.
Yeah, and one of the things that Rishi Sunak says all the time, he says, I cannot help everyone. Is it, do people need to accept that there are limits to what the government can do to ease the sting? Because this recession is led by global trends, perhaps to an even greater extent than any previous ones. So when Rishi Sunak says that he can't help everyone, is that something that actually we all need to get used to hearing from the government?
Yeah, I think if you're all things to all men, then you're just not going to please anybody at the end of the day when you're looking at a tax situation, when you're looking at a budget or spring statement. You've got to make sure you can target the any costs, which invariably are going to happen when you're looking at the public finances, are mainly borne by those with the broadest shoulders, that we're protecting the lowest paid in society. When we have a recovery, we don't want to be doing that on the backs of the most vulnerable, the most lowest paid. So targeting support is best as a starting point, and then we can see what more we can do after that.
But you understand that we're in a unique position right now. I mean, we're going to be talking later on about the inflation of the 1970s and whether we're kind of going back into that kind of territory. There is so much going on right now, dictated not just by the legacy of coronavirus, but also by global conditions, energy prices, etc. That this is a unique situation, and perhaps there'll be people saying, "Well, this is unique. Actually, you should be trying to be all things to as many men and women as you possibly can right now."
Well, a unique situation requires a bespoke, unique solution, and that's why the Chancellor, looking at the public finances around, will be able to address that. But you're absolutely right. This is a global situation. The headwinds are quite extraordinary, with the energy prices exacerbated by Putin's war in Ukraine, with the global supply chain issues around shipping costs and other shortages, labour shortages, and of course, after a global economy effectively closed down for 2 years through COVID, as it's starting and going through its gears in recovery, all of that has got those headwinds that are putting pressure pressure on us for cost of living.
Right, let's talk about P&O. The government knew that P&O were going to sack all 800 workers at 8:30 p.m. on Wednesday. Why didn't why didn't the government do something before security guards boarded the ships the next morning?
Well, look, clearly Grant Shapps did not know that there were going to be no notice on a video Zoom call mass sacking with balaclava wearing security guards. What he was told was that the P&O would be announcing redundancies the following day. This is actually what they did the year before and the year before that as well, and a lot of those redundancies were voluntary, and so he had no thought that they would actually do anything out of the ordinary. What they did do is a callous mass sacking, and that's what we've got to address.
But what about your boss, the business secretary Kwasi Kwarteng? Under UK law, companies who wish to sack more than 100 workers must notify him, and he's given them until 5 o'clock today to write to him before he decides whether to make a formal complaint. So, did he know? Was he notified or not?
No, no, the secretary said absolutely wasn't. And even if you were, it's not an overnight notification that you need. The notification is a reasonable amount of time. It's got to be done in a reasonable way. It's got to be with a view to actually see what more you can do
Fine.
before you make people redundant. And so that's why we're getting all of the facts together to act.
Well, I was going to say, why does he need to wait until 5 o'clock if he was never given that notice? Those are the rules.
They are the rules, but what we're trying to ascertain is exactly who was sacked under which jurisdiction. Were there any differences with other countries' employees as well? It does get very messy when you have a vessel that's flagged with a different country, so not necessarily under UK jurisdiction, with contracts that may well have been signed in Jersey reportedly. So these are the details that we need to find out, rather than just relying on hearsay and secondhand.
Okay, finally, let me ask you about your other colleague, Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who was hoaxed by a couple of individuals, one of them who said that he was the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Isn't that mad that in 2022, someone, a prankster, comedian, is able to speak to the Defence Secretary?
Well, I think it wasn't on a secure line, so there was nothing shared that was of concern secure-wise. There has been concern that Russian information services have been trying to get involved in those hoaxes in cyber attacks as well, and so it's really important that we push that back, but that we don't also fuel their attempts to discredit Western governments and Western approaches, who are trying to tackle this awful situation in Ukraine, as I say, Putin's war.
But the point is that shouldn't we be more, if we know that we might be vulnerable to those kind of hoaxes wherever they come from, should we not be a little bit more security savvy?
Well, as I say, it wasn't on a secure line, so there was nothing secure,
But
no
they spoke to the
security
Defence
issues around
Secretary.
there that was shared. Yeah, but I mean, there's lots of people that speak to the Defence Secretary, but what I'm saying is, it depends on what they spoke about and how they did it, and because it was not on a secure line, there was clearly nothing on the security discussed, and he noticed that it was didn't seem right, so he ended the call. I think that's the important thing.
Right, okay, that is the Business Minister, Paul Scully.
8:26, we can speak now to Lucy Fisher, our chief political commentator. Lucy, what do you make of it? The philosophy of the Tories ahead of spring statement?
Yes, well, Paul Scully was clear that no Conservatives are comfortable with tax rises. I was really struck by how anti he seemed to the road pricing proposals. I think that gives a flavour of the kind of resistance the government will face. He said he's not keen on it now. He even described it as potentially choking off an option of transport, particularly in rural areas where people rely on cars and public transport isn't widely available. The problem for the Treasury is that the issue is happening right now. The sales of electric cars are going up exponentially. Tax take from fuel duty will continue to go down. They can't necessarily wait as long as 10 years. So a difficult policy challenge ahead.
And then he said, we can't be all things to all men. That's an interesting point, and certainly true, but that's a hard sell in some respects, isn't it? Because there's going to be so many people affected by the problems that we've been talking about that it does need to be very wide-ranging in the people that they can help.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's a lot of concern about the poverty trap facing the worst off, but it's by no means just low-paid earners who are facing a real squeeze on cost of living. A lot of middle-class families face really tough times ahead. So it is difficult for Rishi Sunak. On the one hand, he doesn't want to leave some of those low earners facing destitution, as some people like the Resolution Foundation think tank put it. On the other hand, he's got to think of his voters, slightly wealthier, middle-class, shire Tories, newer voters in the Red Wall, and how to help them in the months ahead.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens tomorrow. Great to speak to you, Lucy. That's Lucy Fisher, our chief political commentator.